Hello, booktube. I've been away for a bit. I haven't been making videos because I made a decision a long time ago on this channel that I would try not to make videos when, uh, unless I was happy. And I just recently had a long house guest here, and when house guests leave, I am unhappy, unreasonably so. I am the Twitter meme of the dog looking at the door. I know it's silly. They're still in contact. It's the electronic age. I could write to them all day long. Uh, but still, I get mopey and tend not to be able to turn that around. I thought usually what I have to do is make myself turn it around, and so I am trying to do that now. I'm going to try to do that now. And of course, if it was going to be anybody who was going to make a video that might tempt me back to booktube, it was Michael K Vaughan, who recently made a video about Library of America volumes, about this set of Library of America with the famous livery here. That is, they're wonderful, chunky, well-made, hand-sized books. They've got sewn binding and acid-free pages. They won't brittle or yellow over time. And they are canonical American writers, or moonshot canonical American writers. Some writers that maybe the editorial board at Library of America thinks should be canonical. Library of America itself is a nonprofit, so they have inroads in the right kind of discussion circles about who should be in their lineup. But unfortunately, every nonprofit Titanic is going to run into the iceberg of copyright. If you've got a writer who's making a significant amount of money with a sole and exclusive contract, they might not show up here, just like they won't show up in ordinary reprint volumes like Penguin or Oxford or whatnot. But it's still a great idea to play with. This great idea of who it is the American pantheon. As Mike puts it in his video, either great writers or influential writers, and ideally both. He made a video today about authors that he thinks should be in the Library of America who aren't. And no Cupid doll prizes for for his number one choice. It's one of the easiest things to predict in the world. When I would have this discussion with friends of mine before booktube, before the internet existed, we would always say, well, the Library of America, it should be a born or naturalized American citizen. So one of Mike's choices is a very obvious one, which is Isaac Asimov, who's not born in this country, but is as American as apple pie, so should be in Library of America somewhere. And my friends and I always used to add a sarcastic extra qualification, which is that it can't be anybody who thinks they belong in the Library of America. But of course, that ship has sailed with Kurt Vonnegut and a whole bunch of other writers. And you can't say, well, we're going to have a reprint anthology series that only reprints non-egotistical writers. It'd be a pretty small series. So I'm going to dispense with that second one and just stick to the first one. And I thought as a response, I don't know if I'll upload this video. If I don't, then I will make my excuses when I find a video to upload. Is it feels weird leaving booktube for even a little amount of time. I have warned about this many, many times. Not really warned, because you're free to do what you want, but I've mentioned many times in many videos that when you stop doing booktube, the space that you opened in which to do it closes, like a wound healing. Not that that's meant to be. It's not meant to be that negative, but it closes over, and then you have to reopen it. So I understand why a lot of people who leave booktube spend a year or more saying they intend to get back to it. They're never going to do it because they need to reopen that space. So it's going to feel a little awkward, but I thought I would. This is easy to do, and this is a lot of fun to do. So I thought I would make a video of my own with a few authors who I think should be in Library of America and aren't. There is, since I'm still very mopey, there is of course a theme running through my choices this time around, but I promise, if I upload this video, I promise that I will make another video along these lines without that theme. Nobody's going to know. You're not going to know what I'm talking about anyway. So let's start. And I want to start with Esther Forbes, who will be familiar to a lot of American readers, probably of a certain vintage, because she wrote a book called Johnny Tremaine that is really, really good. Story of a young boy in the American Revolution. So in her Library of America volume, I would have Johnny Tremain, of course, which is not a long book. I would have, she wrote a book called A Mirror for Witches, which is a very good fictional evocation of the Salem witch trials. And she wrote a great biography, Paul Revere and the world he lived in. I think those three would make a nice, hefty size. There are Library of America volumes that are a third bigger than this Flannery O'Connor one, so I think that would fit. And I would also include letters. That would be great. As far as I know, there is no Esther Forbes letters collection at all, unless I missed one 50 years ago. I don't think there is one, and that would be great. I'm sure that they can be found. Her literary remains are rather extensive, and I bet if you put out the call on Facebook or on the letters column of the personal ads of the New York Review of Books, you'd get a lot more. So she is my number one choice, just a volume of Esther Forbes. Then another volume is one of a few on this list that I'm going to propose that is not done usually in Library of America, and not because the copyrights aren't there, not because the offer of being in this series would not be enough to get the literary executors to say yes, but because of a confusing note. The books wouldn't sell. And I don't understand that. I don't understand why Library of America would care about that. But they obviously do, because they stay away from volumes of poetry. They've done a lot of poetry. They have a lot of poetry in their list, but not nearly as much as they could. Up until the turn of the 20th century, the most popular genres of front parlor literary production of any kind were poetry. And everybody knew them. Everybody talked about those volumes. That was all you could do if you were a working reviewer. That you had to be able to review poetry. And that isn't true anymore, so there aren't the kind of volumes that I would like. For instance, my next choice would be Marianne Moore. Just collected poems and selected letters. That's what I would like. She has a big collected poems volume that has been in print many times. So you just put that in a Library of America volume and add a generous selection of letters. She would also benefit, most of these authors would benefit from the way that Library of America does things, which is not normal for reprint volumes like this. There's no table setting. There's no introduction. Thankfully, the editors of Library of America, when they've got a volume ready, do not shop around, here's a fee to Neil Gaiman or Jonathan Franzen to write some stupid bloviating introduction to an author they've obviously not read in years, if ever. Instead, you get really good notes at the back of the volume. They're very circumspect. The clear implication, and I think it's a right one, is that these works can stand on their own. They're written in English, marketed to an English reading audience, native speakers, and most of them relatively contemporary. So the critical apparatus is in the back, and it's minding its own business. It's circumspect, and that would work for a lot of these. That would work for Marianne Moore. You would need a little bit for her, but her collected poems it already exists. So I would love it if somebody could go to her literary executives and just get that. That would be great. The next one that I want to propose would be a 2-volume set. And it's the American writer John Gardner. And I would suggest that volume 1 be 4 works of fiction, which I think the Library of America has onion skin thin pages, and they really pack things in. I think you might be able to do it. I would do the Sunlight Dialogues, Nickel Mountain, the King's Indian, and Freddie's book. And I would drop the King's Indian if you need to drop one of those to make them fit. But I would do that for volume number 1, would be 4 big novels: the Sunlight Dialogues, Nickel Mountain, Freddie's book, and the King's Indian. And then volume 2 would be one more novel, October Light, and some extra stuff. And of course, one of the extra things would be Grendel, his little novella that is the main thing he's known for, if he's known at all. He's known in schools in America because Grendel is taught. But Grendel is mostly taught because it's short. And it makes a really good companion piece to Beowulf, which is also short, and which is something you're going to be teaching. I don't think if it didn't have those advantages, if it were just a short novella about a boy falling in love with a girl, I don't think John Gardner would be remembered at all. But I would include Grendel. I would include Jason and Medea, his freewheeling verse adaptation of the story of Jason and the Argonauts, and I would include his book on moral fiction to make volume 2. So there would be 2 volumes. And my editorial advice to the folks at Library of America would be, uh, set them both in galleys before you let them out. Instead of doing one and promising another and not delivering it. Instead of doing that, wait until they're both ready and then release them as a box set at Christmas time. I will buy it. Actually not. I'll request it from you, but you know what I mean. Then the next one would be another poetry volume. It would be James Merrill, who I would say the poet James Merrill, his collected poems, leaving out, he wrote a long, weird poem, his Ouija board poem, To the Changing Light at Sandover. I would leave that out. It's like 500 pages long, maybe even more than that. I don't remember the last edition that I held in my hand, but it would blow away the rest of it. The rest of his collected poems are big enough for a book. So I would say that for Jimmy Merrill. And I would also say the same thing about Frank O'Hara. Just the collected poems. There's been a crappy trade paperback of his collected poems out there forever and ever and ever. Why not just do that? And with Marianne Moore and with James Merrill, they're great poets. They're obviously great American poets. They deserve to be in this Pantheon collection. But Marianne Moore, a long time ago, maybe she was in the zeitgeist just a bit. Certainly you couldn't get a ticket to one of her live performances for God, Mother, or Country. James Merrill has always been a little bit more rarefied than that. But Frank O'Hara, once upon a time, caught the zeitgeist, just briefly, with lunch poems. Surely that earns him a place. It's not as big a catcher of the zeitgeist as Conan the Barbarian, but for a poet, I'd say it's pretty good for a poet. Then the next author would be another 2-box set. I would suggest that one side of the box has a reproduction of a portrait of the artist as an old man, and that one side of the box has a portrait of the artist as a gorgeous young man. I would suggest that. Feel free to ignore that. And the author is Reynolds Price. And volume 1 would be 3 novels: Love and Work, K Vaughan, and The Tongues of Angels. So he is not known. Reynolds Price is not known anymore. I'm not even sure how much of his stuff is in print anymore. But he deserves to be in this collection. And not just because he would have said, oh, no. And then volume 2 would be 3 Gospels, which is scriptural study and incredibly good, incredibly lively and wonderful. There would be Learning a Trade, his book Learning a Trade, which I don't think has been in print in forever. And it's utterly fascinating. And then finally, a generous collection of letters. And once again, I'm not 100% sure how many letters collections of Reynolds Price have come out. I don't know that there's been a great big volume like One Art for Elizabeth Bishop. I don't know that that's ever happened, unless I'm blanking on it. It could be that I'm blanking on it, but a nice selection of letters, especially since those letters would be discreetly annotated in the back of the book, which would be great. Instead of browbeating you with how much you don't know or how much the editor does know. Library of America series does not do that, and that's wonderful. And then we can finish up with Harold Bloom, the American critic, one of very few critics in Library of America. Kind of ironic, since the one of the driving forces behind the creation of Library of America was himself a great critic and only a third-rate novelist. So he had to have known that, and he certainly did know that. He was told that by many people, and yet, if poetry volumes aren't going to sell, then critic volumes are going to sell even less. I just don't understand why Library of America has to care so much about what sells and doesn't sell. But I would include Harold Bloom. And of course here, his best-selling book, his most accessible book, his, I would say, most beloved book, is his big book on Shakespeare. And it's too big. Unless it was just a Library of America volume of its own, it's too big. So I'm leaving that out, especially since his book on Shakespeare doesn't need any help. Any used bookstore in the country is going to have it. Every library in the country is going to have it. So it doesn't need any help. I would include for him The Visionary Company, which is wordy, but I can't really fault an addition to this list for wordiness if I've got Reynolds Price on this list. Now can I? Much less John Gardner. The Visionary Company is wordy, but it's a really good, interesting, very alive study of the Romantic poets. So I would include that. Then, of course, there's The Anxiety of Influence, which is Bloom's signature work. It's not his two big doorstops, the Western Canon and the Shakespeare book, did much better. They started broad discussions about books and how we think about books and what books we love. In other words, they did exactly what he wanted them to do. But not only are they both too big for this volume, but they didn't make him. The Anxiety of Influence made him. And I love it. I love the basic idea of the Anxiety of Influence, even though I don't know that I agree with a lot of it. Then he wrote, the problem with Harold Bloom is that he wrote, or had assembled for him, books right to the end. And some of them get very self-indulgent, very, very shrill in a way that I don't think does him a lot of credit. But in and around those books, there are a couple that are really, really good. And one of them, I think, infuriating but really good, is How to Read and Why. I would round out this volume with that, unless we can get letters. A selection of letters would also be great. But if not that, or if the letters are too much of a reach, and the Visionary Company, the Anxiety of Influence, and How to Read and Why, those won't make a big volume. Those wouldn't make a volume this big. So if you've got the extra room and you can't really scare up letters, or maybe there's a project out there to get a volume of letters, I wouldn't be surprised if that was true, then maybe lectures. Maybe round out the volume of his Harold Bloom volume with some lectures, which would be great. That would be great. That was where he shone. So rounding out a volume like that would really work. So there you go. I should make now that I'm looking at this list, I realize I really should make another list. I will do that. But there you go. I don't know that I'll upload this at all. I will watch it again. I never rewatch my videos, but it's amazing how fast you lose your footing when you don't do this regularly. Or at least me. So I'll watch this again. If it is watchable, then I'll upload it. And if I do, then I'll make another list, because I obviously owe you one. But this is some food for thought. Again, I want to echo Michael K. Vaughan's own invocation in his video that if you have a booktube channel, we're all extremely bookish people here. If you have a booktube channel and you feel like making a list of your own, feel free to do so. It can't help but be fascinating. Whether you agree with the choices of the videos that went before you or not. There were a couple of authors on Mike's list that I thought, Library of America, I always think, in this case, as in all cases, I always think of The Lion in Winter. If you're a prince, there's hope for every ape in Africa. Clark Ashton Smith. I mean, it says right on there, the only definitive collection of America's greatest writers. But anyway, that's the fun of things like this. Is that we can fight over it, or we can agree about it, or I didn't think of that. Stuff like that is all just great. So if you want to make a list like this, feel free to do it. That would be a lot of fun. And I might make another one, but I'm gonna wrap this up for now, and we'll see if this makes it easier for me to come back. I've got to come back. I can't just mope forever. Even I can't mope forever. So I'll wrap this up, and hopefully I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.